It was at that point that I was like, you know what? This DLC might be the worst DLC we've ever gotten when it comes to Resident Evil. All right, so for today's video, we're going to be reviewing The Shadow of Rose. And we did cover the review or my thoughts for The Shadow of Rose and my Winter's expansion review, but that was mostly spoiler free. And so we're not going to do that for this video. This video will contain spoilers, just so you guys know. And it is worth noting that I did not like Shadow of Rose.
Emotional, damn it!
You know, the funny thing is about with Shadow of Rose is that a couple of months before the game or the DLC release, I actually did a video where I basically outlined all of my concerns for Shadow of Rose. Well, it turns out all of my concerns turned out to be true. You know, one of the things that I basically stated before was I didn't want the DLC to focus on the Resident Evil 8 DLC, because this was during the time when, you know, the developers didn't specify what the DLC was. So, you know, I did a couple of videos where I was basically theorizing what they should do and what they shouldn't do. One of the things I said that they should not do is basically bring us way too much into the future of Resident Evil, mostly because it'd be kind of sad to see all of the mainline characters in a retirement home if we go too much into the future, like at the end of Resident Evil 8. And that was one of the things that occurred with this DLC. We got that. And one of the strangest things is that we did not get anything, any news, anything, any glimpses as to the characters from the Resident Evil universe. You know, one of the weirdest things that I did know that was going to happen was that we didn't see Chris. You know, they mentioned Chris, but we never saw him. So we don't know how he looks, what's he up to, what's happening there. The other weird thing is that, you know, Rose is technically 16 in this DLC. So why is she walking around town all like, you know, we never get a scene where she's like talking to her mom. You know, we don't get a scene with Miranda. Like that's really weird. Or sorry, not Miranda, I mean Mia. Sorry, Mia. And it's really strange. Like, why did we not get that? You know, we also don't get any news regarding the end of that cliffhanger that we got for Resident Evil 8 Village, where, you know, all of the BSAA team is basically using BOWs, which kind of contradicts, you know, the whole point of why the BSAA was established and created. It really left us with a lot of questions with that ending for Resident Evil 8 Village, and I thought that maybe we would get a glimpse at what's to come for Resident Evil 9. Well, no, we didn't get any information regarding that. This whole DLC was really focused on just Rose, and I thought that was really strange. You know, it was really strange. The only good thing that came out of this whole DLC, in my opinion, well, strictly talking about Shadow of Rose, was that it was the end of the Winter's story. So, you know, they kind of just closed everything off. They finished everything, and that was that. But one of the weird things also about this DLC, the other concern that I had is that after seeing footage of the Tokyo Game Show or the Tokyo Game Awards, I always forget. I always get them confused. But when the little glimpse of gameplay that we got from there, I kind of noticed that the gameplay of her using her magic was kind of really reminding me of Parasite Eve 2. Now, if you guys haven't played Parasite Eve 2, it's basically the same developers for Final Fantasy. They basically decided to make their own version of Resident Evil. And in that game, your character moves around like, you know, standard, you know, like the OG trilogy of Resident Evil, but you actually get powers. You can do, you know, lightning powers, fire powers, whatever. And to be honest, Shadow of Rose was kind of like a ripoff of that. Now, don't get me wrong. I actually really liked Parasite Eve 2. I thought it was a great game. And I also played the third one. I never played the first Parasite Eve. Those are great games, you know, the ones that I played, you know, the second and third. But I don't think it belongs in the Resident Evil. You know, a lot of people in my Winter's Expansion review video that I posted, you know, I got a lot of comments of people saying, and I totally agree with, is that they said that if Shadow of Rose had not had the Resident Evil name on it, they would have liked it. And you know what? I have to agree. You know, if Shadow of Rose had just released and it was separate from the Resident Evil universe, I would have been completely fine with it. The first half of the game, I had no issues with. It was mostly the second half. The main issue I had with the game was the fact that, Rose had powers. Resident Evil has never had that. So why is it that with Resident Evil, 8 Village, we were talking about all of this mystical stuff about how Rose has powers and abilities, and it was strange, and one of the things that I always thought, and I actually did not like about Resident Evil 8 Village, which near the end, right before you fight Miranda, the Duke actually tells you something really strange. He says, Ethan, Mr. Winters, as soon as you go past this point, you won't be able to go back to your old world. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? What is this, like Narnia? Like, when did Resident Evil become Alice in Wonderland? Or or like a Narnia novel where the characters go into another world. I was really confused about that. And when Shadow of Rose released, it was very apparent that, okay, now that makes sense. I understand what they were discussing. Because at the end of Resident Evil 8 Village, we did understand that the Mega Mycete was kind of like a thing, a living organism that was basically like a spirit or a / soul stealer. Again, these are not things that we've seen in previous Resident Evil. One of the things that I really liked about the Resident Evil series, I've always liked about Resident Evil series, is the fact that all of the paranormal or weird stuff that occurs in the games is always scientifically explained. Sometimes, okay, it's a little pushing the limit, but they always have a scientific, kind of thing. So it's a little more believable in my opinion, compared to other games that are more just, straight out of a horror movie, like a paranormal, like for example, like Silent Hill. Resident Evil has never been like that. So, we're never going to be able to see demons showing up or people being possessed in Resident Evil, because that's not the games at all. That's never been the story. And it's always been, government, and the pharmaceutical companies that are working with governments, with military to create these monsters. And one could also argue that Wesker's, whole powers and all of that stuff, well, in that sense, it kind of made sense, because personally, I thought that made a little more sense, mostly because the Project W was always kind of like a super soldier kind of program. That's how I saw it. And it also made a lot of sense with the whole, founding of Umbrella. And that's basically what Oswald E. Spencer's goal for humanity was, to push the evolution. Again, it's always relying back on that scientific, background, or that foundation. And with Shadow of Rose, we didn't really get to see that. If anything, they started making all of this mystical stuff, again, with the Mega Mycete being a huge spirit stealer. It's like, what? How is this Resident Evil? And after playing Shadow of Rose, that whole thing, that line that the Dukes mentioned at the end of Resident Evil 8, right before the Miranda fight, about Ethan not being able to come back to this world because he's too infected. Again, these are all new themes that have never been explored in the Resident Evil series. And since we're just getting started with the review of Shadow of Rose, I guess it's also worth mentioning there's a lot of plot hole points, especially if we look at the beginning of the game where Rose is speaking to her friend. I don't even remember his name. Was his name Kay? Like, again, not memorable at all. But it's very strange, because during the whole game, I was actually thinking, after you realize that Miranda, near the end of the DLC, you realize that Miranda was actually that guy, that friend of Rose. Again, I don't remember his name. It actually begs the question, wait a second, was that an actual person? And how did Miranda phase through the Mega Mycete and come to our world? Again, these are all just, it's really weird. And to be honest, it was kind of bad storytelling. My huge issue with this character, with this new character that we've never heard before, is that by the end of the game, I was really confused looking back. I was like, wait a second. So is this an actual character, or was this always a figment of Rose's imagination? But then, wait a second, didn't he have a lab? So that's an actual physical place, unless Rose was just walking into this lab. So was that an actual person? Was Kay, I think his name is, was that an actual person in this world? Or was he always just a made up person that that was in Rose's figment of imagination that in reality was Miranda. That really confuses things, and it's there's a huge plot hole there that could have been easily addressed, easily fixed. And you know what? I can't stand it when stories do that. It almost feels as if they give the audience members the key to the story. Like, no, you fix it. Here you go. This doesn't make sense, but here, you fix it. I can't stand that when movies do that. And that's just due to poor storytelling. And talking about story points that just really did not make much sense was the whole thing with the Duke. Somebody in the Resident Evil dev team was probably thinking, oh, that would be really cool if you actually fought the Duke and he was actually a bad guy in the thing. And you know what? We'll give him a mask. Yeah, that'll look really cool. You could tell that somebody just had that idea. And then when you actually play the game, it's very confusing because in reality, the Duke isn't dead. So his spirit/soul isn't in the Megamycete, which is very confusing. And they do address this, which I do have to give them credit for. They did actually try to explain that Miranda was trying to make actual beings in this mystical world of Resident Evil. Again, Resident Evil has never been like that, but she decided to do that, and then the person started acting not like the character or the person that she was trying to make. Well, of course, like why? What? And again, I don't understand this. Again, this is not based on science or kind of just going off of mystical stuff. And there was a lot of Harry Potter too. I mentioned this in my Winter's Expansion review. There was a lot of Harry Potter kind of winks. I don't know who the Potterhead that's working at the Resident Evil development team, but you got to stop bringing Harry Potter stuff into Resident Evil. Because again, I wouldn't doubt that this is why all of this Shadow of Rose DLC or even Resident Evil 8 was all just mystical, like even down to, and this I actually covered in a video of 5 things that I hated about Resident Evil 8 Village. It's also worth noting that I didn't hate Resident Evil 8 Village, but these are just 5 things that I just couldn't stand. And one of those things that I mentioned in that video was I couldn't stand that near the beginning introduction of the Village of Shadow's book where, Mia is reading to Rose in the beginning scene of Resident Evil 8. It's almost a direct ripoff of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. And again, we see this Harry Potter, inspiration coming through with Shadow of Rose, especially when it comes to the enemy types. And the enemy type is basically like a Dementor. That's something that I stated in my concerns that I have for I almost said Parasite Eve 2. No, my concerns that I have for Shadow of Rose. So again, it's just really weird. Yeah, so going back to what I was saying, right? I don't like that they're trying to add all of this mystical stuff for Resident Evil when it's never been like that for Resident Evil. It would have been okay if this was Parasite Eve or if this was a different game. I would have been fine with Shadow of Rose. So you know what? That actually leads me to one of the things that I did not like about Shadow of Rose. And you know what? There's lots of things that I didn't like about it. First off, I did not like that the game literally gives you a Lemmy and gives you a shotgun. Now, at the beginning of the game, we meet this character named Michael, who everybody guessed, because it's really bad storytelling. Everybody guessed already that was Ethan Winters. That was actually Rose's dad that was talking through her and guiding her through the Megamycete, because his consciousness, his soul, his /spirit got trapped in the Megamycete after the events or the ending events of Resident Evil 8 Village. So, yeah, that was not a good story. Everybody knew, like as soon as we got the first trailer for Shadow of Rose, everybody already knew that was Ethan. So, but anyways, one of the things that made no sense is that if Ethan could give Rose any weapon, why did he give her a handgun? Now, again, you could counter argue that point by saying, well, Rose is 16, she doesn't know how to handle firearms or whatever. I don't know. But, if my dad saw me in in some kind of, weird mystical world and he could give me any weapon, I don't think he would be giving me a handgun. I would hope that my dad would actually give me like a little bit, something with a little more kick, like maybe an assault rifle, or like a shotgun. I don't know, but he just gave her a dinky Lemmy gun, which, again, if you've played Resident Evil 8 Village, you know that's like the worst. That's like the basic first gun that they give you. And it's like, okay, all right then. And speaking of the enemy types, I did cover this in my winter's expansion review. I did not like that, during the whole story, all you fight is just one enemy. You literally fight the Dementors, rip off, and then after you fight the what's it called? The faces guy, the mini boss that you fight before you fight Miranda. And I actually gotta say, the face guy or whatever, the mold face thing, I don't even remember his name. That was actually okay. I didn't have anything bad to say about that specific boss. I actually thought it was completely different from what we've seen before, and I actually kind of liked it. Continuing with the enemy variants, I did not like the ending of Shadow of Rose. I did not like how at the end you literally fight Miranda again, and it's basically the same enemy movements. It's basically the same. It's the same boss fight. It's a little tweaked to be a little different, but I'm pretty sure everything is basically the same. And for those of you that actually watched my my stream for Shadow of Rose, a lot of you probably saw that at the end I was just literally confused. I did not know what I had to do. It was not clear. I was like, what do I have to do here? Like, I was just literally to dodge. I was just pressing circle and I was just dodging right, left. I was just going in a full circle at one point because honestly, it was just weird to fight with powers. And it almost felt like the developers didn't really think about how that fight was going to go with Rose having special abilities. So it was literally so easy to dodge. But I was just confused as to the controls because then you have to bring your little tendrils and kind of hit or whatever. To be honest with you, I actually don't even really remember the full fight, the full boss fight at the end. By that point, I was just exhausted with the game. I did not like it. Now, as mentioned, the first part of Shadow of Rose I actually didn't really have a big issue with. It was kind of basic, but one of the things that I actually would have liked to have seen in the DLC would have been more enemy variants, more guns, end game rewards, and as well as the option to upgrade your stuff. I know that in this DLC, the Duke was literally evil, but it would have been interesting if they just, made Miranda tried to make another so-called Duke, and that one's actually good. You know what I mean? Or maybe he's just stupid or something. Something different that's not like Duke, but he can still do the same job as Duke did in the Resident Evil story. Again, these are just small things that I think would have made the game better. Another thing that I also mentioned in that Winter's Review expansion was I did not like how the game was really short. I think it only took me 3 hours. Well, in reality, it was 2 hours and 59 minutes to beat the Shadow of Rose and on the highest difficulty. That's the other thing that I thought was really strange was that they didn't give us the option of Village of Shadows difficulty, which is the hardest difficulty for Resident Evil 8 Village. Why did they just omit that? Like, why? Like, I don't understand. Is it because the second half of the game, they don't give you any weapons? That's actually one of the things that I thought was really dumb about this DLC. And you can actually watch my stream because like I said, I streamed the whole thing on the channel. One of the weird things was I actually died more times in the second half of the game, the part where Rose literally doesn't have any weapons because they get all taken by Evelyn or whatever from Resident Evil 7, and you're just going through the whole puppet thing. Yeah, there was a lot of instances where I just died in those moments, but I didn't die in the first half of the game. And that's actually one of the reasons why I like the first half, because you're actually playing. It's not like a story, forced narrative kind of a game. It's not like that. No, you actually go through the whole Castle Dimitrescu, you fight all of the enemies, and you go through the story. You progress. You're actually playing a game. But why is it that when we go to the second layer of the Mega Mycete spirit world, if you will, why do I not have my weapons? Why do I have to do these dumb, they're not even hard puzzles. They're just dumb. You know what I mean? Like, you're just going through, you're hiding, there's some stealth added, and it's like, okay, this is annoying. It was at that point that I was like, you know what? This DLC might be the worst DLC we've ever gotten when it comes to Resident Evil. I was like, dude, okay, you want me to pass through these dolls and whatever. And I also saw some other YouTubers, I think, or other people that played that whole scene in House Beneviento in 2.0, where you have a bunch of Mia dolls that are after you, and people were actually scared of that. Dude, that part was not scary at all. it was just boring. Like I had no enjoyment whatsoever, because again, it just felt like I was just going from one room to another, and it was just a question of timing. It wasn't a question of gameplay or skill or walking or whatever. And it's like I'm just literally walking and I have to hide and then I have to go. It's just really dumbed down kind of gameplay. And to be honest, I thought it was kind of lame that they reused the same kind of thing that they used for Resident Evil 8 Village. Now, this is something that I haven't really discussed on the channel. I think I've discussed it maybe once, but one of the things that I did not like about Resident Evil 8 Village was House Beneviento. You know, my first playthrough or my first run through of that area, I thought it was fine. I had no issues with it. But once you start replaying that whole bit, it starts to get really old very quickly, because again, it's just a question of, oh, I've already done this puzzle. I just do the puzzle. I move. There's a baby that's after me, but I just have to run this way. And that's how Shadow of Rose felt. And I didn't like that they basically reused the same idea that they had for House Beneviento for Shadow of Rose. That just felt really cheap to me. And yeah, it wasn't worth the $30 to just play that again. Like again, it was fine the first time, but that was in Resident Evil 8 Village. So why are we getting that again for Shadow of Rose? Again, these are things that I just did not like. Another weird thing that I also noticed with just the mechanics of Rose was that she moved like an old lady, you know. And this is a girl that's supposed to be 16, but I noticed that she would move like an old lady, especially when enemies would kind of reach your whole aura or whatever. She would start moving slow, like you couldn't get away, and it was like, what? It just made no sense. You know what? I did verify this because I did play the game twice. I played a run through on hard and as well as casual, and the casual run was my second playthrough, since I basically wanted to get footage for this video and for future videos. And another gameplay mechanic that really was just annoying was the fact that Rose's powers, it wouldn't work sometimes. So there were certain areas where you had to open a door or open this mud pile and get free of that so that you could pass through and progress through the castle, or even later on. You had to use your little flower powers or whatever. And I would literally do it, but it's like, no, you had to be a little closer for it to actually, you know, work. And it's like, what? Okay, so my powers only work like when I'm just in a when I'm at a certain distance away from it. If I'm a step away from that distance, it doesn't work. Again, this is something that I brought up in my Winter's Expansion review, spoiler-free review of Shadow of Rose. But yeah, it was just not good, dude. And going back to the first point that I had near the beginning of this video, was there were so many plot holes. Another example of a plot hole was, and I could go on and on about all the plot holes, but I don't really want to do that. I don't really want to just destroy this whole DLC, because to be honest, it was just not good. But the point that I wanted to say is that there's several points in the game where Ethan actually teleports Rose to different areas of the Megamycete level spirit world, whatever you want to call it. But it's like, okay, well, if he could have done that, why didn't he do that at the beginning of the story? Rose was very adamant at the beginning. And also, one of the things that I thought was really dumb was that literally Rose could have left the Megamycete at any time, but she was just being really stubborn and she didn't want to have her powers. And I also thought it was kind of dumb that she had to be in the Megamycete to actually grow her powers. She didn't grow her powers during like her whole entire life up to the point of 16. She never used her, I guess maybe because she never used her powers. But it's like, okay, well, why aren't we getting an explanation for that? Again, I don't like it when stories make the audience members fix the story. It's like, can't you do this? Like, you guys are the writers. Like, can you fix this? And again, I didn't like that. And and like I was saying, right, why didn't Ethan just bring her to the actual spot? Why didn't he bring her to the crystal or whatever so that she could get rid of her powers? Why didn't he do that at the start? That was weird. I didn't get that. I didn't like that Rose could have literally have left at any time, but she was just being stubborn. She's like, no, I want to get rid of my powers. You know, like an angsty teenager, whatever. That's just her character. That's fine. But one of the dumbest things about this DLC of Shadow of Rose was the fact that they really tried their best, their hardest to literally hide Ethan's face from us. And to this day, I'm still really confused about that. I don't understand what was the point of that? Why did the developers decide to just not show Ethan's face? Like, come on. Seriously? Seriously, you could have shown you could have shown us his face and given us closure to the character, since we're never going to see this character again apparently. Like, the Winter Saga is literally done. They shut the door to that, and now they're going to start another thing. It's really confusing, and I don't know why. To this day I don't understand. And we already knew that this was going to happen a couple months before the launch of Shadow of Rose, and I did cover it on the channel. The producer was very adamant that he already took a creative decision in Resident Evil 7 to not show Ethan, because he wanted the characters to be in the shoes of Ethan. But it's like, okay, but I don't have any connection to a character that doesn't have a face, that doesn't act like I am. This is not an RPG. Resident Evil doesn't give you the options of choosing this or choosing that dialogue option. No, we're literally just watching the world through his eyes, and you're expecting me to be that character or make me feel like as if I'm playing as that character? No, this isn't Skyrim, where you can actually pick if you want to be aggressive or you want to be nice, or like Mass Effect, you want to be a jerk, or you want to be you want to answer nicely or just neutral. They don't give you that in Resident Evil. So that whole creative decision from the producer or whatever, and him basically saying, no, I want to continue with this creative decision that I did with that was just stupid. Yeah, if anything, this DLC just it felt like it was just an experiment. It kind of felt like, let's make this DLC not like the rest of Resident Evil. Let's just try all of our ideas and let's put it into this little 3-hour story and let's see how it does. And you know what? I don't know how you guys feel about this game or this DLC. And hey, if you liked it, that's fine. That's okay. You know what I mean? Like, I always respect your guys's opinion, because at the end of the day, even my review is just an opinion. I could actually continue on and start, nitpicking on every single detail that I thought was just stupid and should have just not been in the game. But overall, to summarize everything that I've stated so far in this review, I did not like this. I did not like this DLC, and it might be the worst DLC ever for Resident Evil. Now, it is worth mentioning that I actually never finished the Resident Evil 7's DLC because I thought it was a little bit boring, and by then I was actually just really sick and tired of Resident Evil 7. But what little that I played of Resident Evil 7's DLC, I thought was better than Shadow of Rose. So to be honest, I think this DLC was probably the worst DLC we've ever gotten. Not counting Umbrella Corps DLC or anything like that. I'm just talking about the mainline games. Yeah, I gotta say, I think this might be the worst DLC ever. And yeah, I never want to touch this again. I never want to go back and play this. You know what? It kind of reminded me of my experience with the Netflix Resident Evil show. That show was so left field. It was so different from anything we've actually seen from Resident. It was not Resident Evil. It was its own thing, and that's what I kind of felt with Shadow of Rose. It was its own thing that, to be honest, I never want to hear or talk about ever again. But I know that since I am a Resident Evil channel, that is inevitable. I am going to be playing this again, but I don't want to play it anytime soon. But you know what? I'm just glad that it's over. I think that's the only good news. That's the only light in the deep, dark tunnel. This whole thing was that we never have to go back to Rose's story. We never have to go back to Ethan's story. That whole chapter of Resident Evil has been dealt with. It's done. I don't want to go back ever again. That's what the developers have stated. Hopefully they keep their word and they actually move on to showing us characters that we actually want to see. Like, for example, Jill, which we haven't actually seen in such a long time, or any other of the Resident Evil characters. Instead of giving us more no-face characters that, to be honest, I don't really like. Well, if you guys enjoyed this video, then click this video if you guys want to see the 5 things that I hated about Resident Evil 8. Now, it is worth mentioning that I actually did like Resident Evil 8 Village, but these are just things that I did not like, and that if they had changed, would have made the game better. But anyways, thanks for watching.